The gunshot echoed across the canyon just as Quinn Dalton's horse stumbled on loose rock, nearly throwing him from the saddle. He steadied himself, cursing under his breath as another bullet ricocheted off the stone wall 10 feet above his head. 3 riders had been trailing him since midday, and the sun was already sinking low behind the red cliffs of northern Arizona territory. Quinn spurred his horse forward, deeper into the maze of sandstone formations that surrounded this desolate stretch of land 20 miles east of Ash Fork. He'd been transporting payroll for the railroad when the ambush caught him on the main road. Now, all he had was his life, his horse, and the revolver at his hip with 4 bullets left. The canyon narrowed ahead, forcing Quinn to dismount and lead his exhausted gelding through a gap barely wide enough for man and beast. Behind him, voices shouted back and forth. The outlaws were getting closer. Quinn scrambled up a rocky incline, pulling his reluctant horse along, his boots sliding on loose gravel. The natural walls rose higher on either side, casting deep shadows in the fading light. He spotted an opening in the cliff face, partially hidden by a twisted juniper tree. Without hesitation, Quinn pulled his horse toward it, hoping for somewhere to take cover. The opening was larger than it first appeared, a genuine cave entrance about 6 feet high. He tied his horse to the juniper and drew his pistol, stepping carefully into the darkness. The cave extended back farther than he expected. As his eyes adjusted, Quinn noticed something that made him freeze. There was light deeper in, a faint orange glow that could only be firelight. Someone was living here. His first instinct was to retreat, but the voices outside grew louder. The outlaws would be on him any second. "Don't move another step," a woman's voice called out from the shadows. The words were steady but strained with fear. Quinn raised his hand slowly, his pistol pointed at the ceiling. "Madam, I mean you no harm. There are men chasing me, dangerous men. I just need somewhere to hide for a spell. Put the gun down." Slowly, he complied, setting the revolver on the ground and straightening up. From the deeper recesses of the cave, a figure emerged into the dim firelight. She was young, maybe 23 or 24, with long dark hair pulled back in a practical braid. Her dress was worn and dirt-stained, and she held an old rifle pointed directly at his chest. But what struck Quinn most were her eyes, wide and intelligent, filled with a mixture of fear and determination that spoke of someone who had learned to survive against terrible odds. "I have been hiding for months," she said quietly, her voice wavering slightly. "And I cannot let anyone discover I am here. Those men outside, are they lawmen?" "No, madam, outlaws. They robbed me on the road and now they want to make sure there are no witnesses." Quinn kept his hands visible, trying to look as non-threatening as possible. Outside, he could hear hoofbeats approaching the cave entrance. The woman's face went pale. She lowered the rifle slightly, indecision flickering across her features. For a long moment they stood in silence, 2 strangers caught in a web of circumstance. Then she made her choice. "Get away from the entrance," she whispered urgently. "Bring your horse back here, quickly and quietly." Quinn didn't question her. He retrieved his pistol and slipped back outside, untying his gelding and leading it carefully into the cave. The woman had already smothered most of the fire, leaving just enough light to see by. She gestured toward a side passage Quinn hadn't noticed, barely wide enough for the horse. "This way. Be silent." They moved deeper into the cave system, the woman leading with confidence that spoke of intimate familiarity with every twist and turn. The passage opened into a larger chamber, and here Quinn could see evidence of extended habitation. Blankets arranged into a makeshift bed, supplies stacked neatly against one wall, a small collection of books and various items that suggested someone making the best of harsh circumstances. Outside, voices echoed into the cave entrance. Quinn's hand moved to his pistol, but the woman shook her head firmly. They stood perfectly still in the darkness, barely breathing. The voices grew louder, then faded. Minutes passed like hours. Finally, the sound of hoofbeats receded into the distance. Neither of them moved for several more minutes. When the woman finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "They are gone. For now." Quinn released a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Thank you, madam. You saved my life." She set the rifle down and moved to relight the fire properly, her hands shaking slightly. In the growing light, Quinn could see her more clearly. She was beautiful in an understated way, with high cheekbones and a determined set to her jaw. Dirt smudged one cheek, and her dress was patched in several places, but there was a dignity about her that poverty could not diminish. "My name is Quinn Dalton," he said softly. "I work for the railroad out of Ash Fork." The woman looked at him for a long moment, as if deciding whether to trust him with her name. Finally, she said, "Josephine Sawyer. Most people call me Josie." "Miss Sawyer, I do not mean to pry, but why are you hiding in a cave? Who are you running from?" Josie's expression hardened, and she turned away to tend the fire. "That is a long story, Mr. Dalton, and not one I am inclined to share with a stranger." "Fair enough. Though I reckon we are past being complete strangers now, seeing as how we just hid from murderous outlaws together." Despite herself, Josie's lips twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "I suppose that is true enough." She moved to her supplies and produced a battered coffee pot and some provisions. "You must be hungry. It is not much, but you are welcome to share what I have." As she prepared a simple meal over the fire, Quinn found himself studying her with growing curiosity. Everything about this situation raised questions. A young woman alone in the wilderness, hiding in a cave for months, with enough supplies and fortitude to survive. She moved with the efficiency of someone used to taking care of herself, but there was a brittleness to her composure, like glass held together by sheer force of will. They ate in awkward silence at first, but gradually, Quinn began to talk. He told her about his work with the railroad, about growing up in Missouri and coming west after the war. He spoke of his parents, both dead now, and his younger sister married to a shopkeeper in Santa Fe. Josie listened without commenting much, but Quinn noticed she relaxed slightly as he talked, her shoulders losing some of their rigid tension. "What about you?" Quinn asked gently as they finished eating. "Do you have family?" Josie's face clouded over. "I did. My father owned a ranch about 30 miles south of here. He died 2 years ago. After that, everything fell apart." She fell silent, staring into the fire. Quinn waited, sensing she needed time to decide whether to continue. Finally, she took a deep breath and began to speak. "After my father died, a man named Silas Vaughn started pressuring me to marry him. He owns the biggest spread in the region and he wanted our land. I refused. My father had built that ranch from nothing, and I was not about to hand it over to a man I despised." Her voice grew harder. "Vaughn did not take rejection well. He started spreading rumors, making it difficult for me to hire hands or do business in town. Then things got worse. His men started showing up at the ranch, making threats, stealing cattle. The sheriff would not help. Vaughn has him in his pocket." Quinn felt anger rising in his chest. He'd seen this kind of thing before, powerful men who thought they could take whatever they wanted. "So you ran?" "Not at first. I tried to hold on, tried to fight back. But 6 months ago, Vaughn's men came to the ranch house in the middle of the night. They set fire to the barn and told me this was my last warning. Marry Vaughn or face the consequences." Josie's hands clenched into fists. "I shot one of them. I do not know if I killed him, but I wounded him badly. After that, I knew I could not stay." Vaughn would use it as an excuse to have me arrested or worse, so I took what I could carry and disappeared. Why here? Why not go to another town, start fresh somewhere else? Because I am not giving up my land, Josie said fiercely. That ranch is all I have left of my father, of my family. I have been living out here, watching, waiting for an opportunity to prove what Vaughn has done. But he is too clever, too well protected, and I am just one person. Quinn understood now the depth of her situation. She was trapped, unable to reclaim her life but unwilling to abandon everything she held dear. How long can you keep living like this? As long as I have to. But there was a hollowness in her voice that suggested even she did not believe it anymore. They talked late into the night. Quinn learned that Josie had been surviving on game she trapped, wild plants she gathered, and occasional trips to a small settlement 40 miles east where no one knew her. She'd been a schoolteacher before her father died, educated and well-read, which explained the books stacked carefully against the cave wall. She'd taught herself to hunt, to survive in the wilderness, to endure solitude that would have broken most people. In turn, Quinn found himself sharing things he rarely spoke about. The war had left scars, both visible and hidden. He'd lost friends, seen things no man should see. Coming west had been about starting over, leaving the ghosts behind. But some ghosts followed you no matter how far you ran. As exhaustion finally caught up with them, Josie offered Quinn a blanket and pointed to a flat section of the cave floor. You should rest. Those men might come back at first light to search more thoroughly. What will you do? Quinn asked. The same thing I always do. Survive. Quinn lay down but found sleep elusive. The cave was surprisingly comfortable, the air cool and dry, but his mind churned with everything he'd learned. He was supposed to return to Ash Fork, report the robbery, resume his normal life. But the thought of leaving Josie here alone, hiding in a cave while a corrupt rancher stole her life from her, sat like a stone in his gut. When morning light began filtering into the cave entrance, Quinn was already awake. He found Josie standing at the opening, watching the sunrise paint the canyon walls in shades of gold and red. She looked tired, dark circles under her eyes suggesting she'd slept little if at all. I have been thinking, Quinn said, approaching quietly so as not to startle her. About your situation. Do not, Josie said without turning around. Do not involve yourself in my troubles, Mr. Dalton. You have your own life to get back to. Maybe I do not want to go back just yet. Maybe I want to help. Now she did turn, her expression guarded. Why would you do that? You do not know me. This is not your fight. Because it is the right thing to do. Because a woman should not have to live in a cave because some powerful man thinks he can take whatever he wants. Because I have spent the last 5 years trying to convince myself that I am a good man, and good men do not walk away when someone needs help. Josie studied his face for a long moment. You could get hurt. Vaughn is dangerous and he has a lot of men working for him. I have faced worse. Quinn met her gaze steadily. Let me help you. We can figure this out together. Something shifted in Josie's expression, a crack in the armor she'd built around herself. I have been alone for so long, she said softly. I almost forgot what it feels like to have someone on my side. You are not alone anymore, Quinn said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. They spent the morning making plans. Quinn would return to Ash Fork carefully, watching for the outlaws who'd robbed him. Once there, he'd investigate Silas Vaughn quietly, looking for evidence of his crimes or for allies who might stand against him. Josie was reluctant to let Quinn put himself at risk, but he could see the hope kindling in her eyes, fragile but growing stronger. Before he left, Josie gave him detailed directions to her ranch, or what remained of it. She described Vaughn, his main enforcers, and the layout of his property. They arranged a way to communicate, a spot where Quinn could leave messages hidden under a distinctive red rock about halfway between the cave and Ash Fork. "Be careful," Josie said as Quinn prepared to leave. "Vaughn is not a forgiving man. If he suspects you are helping me, I will be careful." "I promise." Quinn hesitated, then added, "You could come with me, stay somewhere safe while I work on this." Josie shook her head firmly. "No, if Vaughn or his men spot me in town, everything becomes harder. I am safer here." She managed a small smile. "Besides, I've gotten rather attached to my cave." Quinn rode out as the sun climbed higher, his mind already working through the problem. The journey back to Ash Fork took most of the day, and he rode cautiously, watching for any sign of the men who'd ambushed him. The Arizona Territory stretched around him in all its harsh beauty, red rock and scrub brush, the distant mountains hazy in the heat. Ash Fork sat along the railroad line, a rough collection of buildings that served the workers and travelers passing through. Quinn had a small room above the general store, basic but clean. He stabled his horse and headed straight for the railroad office to report the robbery. His supervisor, a gruff man named Henderson, was less than sympathetic. "Lost the entire payroll. Dalton, that is coming out of your wages." "I was ambushed by 3 armed men, Tom. What was I supposed to do?" Henderson sighed and leaned back in his chair. "File a report with the sheriff. Not that it will do much good. Outlaws hit stages and riders all the time out here. Might as well be trying to catch smoke." The sheriff's office was a small adobe building on the main street. Sheriff Porter was in his 50s, with a substantial belly and eyes that held more cunning than his lazy demeanor suggested. Quinn gave him a description of the robbery, leaving out any mention of Josie or the cave. "3 men, you say? Could have been the Garner gang. They have been working this area." Porter made a few notes but did not seem particularly interested. "I will keep an eye out, but I would not hold your breath waiting for your money back." As Quinn turned to leave, he asked casually, "You know anything about a rancher named Silas Vaughn?" Porter's expression changed subtly, becoming more guarded. "Vaughn? Sure, I know him. Biggest landowner in the region. Why do you ask?" "Just heard the name mentioned. Thought I might look him up about a job." "Vaughn does his own hiring. You would have to ride out to his place if you are serious about work." Porter's tone suggested the conversation was over. Quinn left the sheriff's office with his suspicions confirmed. Porter was definitely connected to Vaughn somehow. That would make things more complicated. Over the next few days, Quinn carefully gathered information. He talked to people in the saloons, the general store, anywhere men gathered, and spoke freely. The picture that emerged was disturbing. Silas Vaughn had come to the area about 5 years ago with money and ambition. He'd bought up smaller ranches, sometimes through legitimate means, sometimes through intimidation. Those who opposed him tended to have accidents or simply disappeared. The law looked the other way, and most people were too frightened to speak openly against him. The Sawyer Ranch had been particularly desirable because of its water rights and prime grazing land. Several people remembered Josie's father, describing him as a good man who'd built his spread through hard work. His death had been attributed to a riding accident, but Quinn heard whispers that suggested otherwise. Josie herself was remembered with a mixture of sympathy and disapproval. Some admired her attempt to hold onto her father's legacy. Others thought she should have been practical and accepted Vaughn's proposal. A few people mentioned the shooting incident, though details were vague. Vaughn had put out the story that Josie had lost her mind with grief and become dangerous, attacking his men without provocation when they'd tried to help her. Quinn found one potential ally, an older man named Frank who ran the livery stable. Frank had known Josie's father and clearly did not believe Vaughn's version of events. That girl would not hurt a fly unless she had good reason, Frank said quietly, checking to make sure they were alone. Whatever Vaughn says happened, you can bet the truth is the opposite. But what can anyone do? Man owns half the county and the law besides. What if someone could prove Vaughn's crimes? Quinn asked carefully. Frank gave him a sharp look. You thinking of taking on Silas Vaughn, son? That is a good way to end up dead in a ditch somewhere. My advice is to forget whatever fool notion you are entertaining and stick to your railroad work. But Quinn could not forget. Every night he thought about Josie alone in that cave, her life stolen from her by a man who faced no consequences for his actions. He began riding out to the message rock, leaving updates on what he'd learned and checking for any notes from her. Twice he found brief messages in her neat handwriting, thanking him for his help and urging him to be cautious. 2 weeks after their first meeting, Quinn made a decision. He would ride out to the Sawyer ranch himself, see what condition it was in, and possibly confront Vaughn directly. It was risky, but sitting in town gathering second-hand information was not getting them any closer to a solution. The ranch was not hard to find following Josie's directions. What had once been a thriving operation was now falling into disrepair. The main house still stood, but the barn was a burned skeleton. Fences were broken, and the land had an abandoned feel despite some cattle grazing in the distance bearing Vaughn's brand. Quinn was examining the remains of the barn when he heard horses approaching. 3 riders came over the rise, and Quinn recognized trouble immediately. These were hard men, the kind who hired out their guns and asked no questions about the jobs they took. "You are trespassing," the lead rider called out. He was a lean man with a scar running down one cheek and eyes cold as river stones. Quinn kept his hands visible and his voice calm. "Did not realize anyone owned this place. Looks abandoned. It belongs to Mr. Vaughn now. And he does not appreciate strangers poking around his property. My mistake. I will be on my way." But the 3 men spread out, blocking his path to his horse. The scarred man smiled, and it was not pleasant. "Not so fast. Vaughn likes to know who is taking an interest in his business." "You got a name, Quinn Dalton. I work for the railroad." "Long way from the railroad, Mr. Dalton. What brings you out here?" Quinn shrugged, projecting a casualness he did not feel. "Heard there might be work. Times are tight, figured I would check around." The scarred man exchanged glances with his companions. "Work, huh? Well, Mr. Vaughn is particular about who he employs. Tell you what, why do not you ride back with us and meet him yourself? He can decide if he has any use for you." It was not really a question. Quinn nodded slowly, recognizing he had no good options at the moment. "Lead the way." They rode for about an hour, heading toward a sprawling ranch complex that made the Sawyer place look modest by comparison. Vaughn's ranch house was a 2-story structure with fresh paint and well-maintained outbuildings. Clearly, business was good, though Quinn suspected much of that prosperity came from stolen land and intimidation. Silas Vaughn was waiting on the porch, a tall man in his 40s with silver streaking his dark hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to being obeyed. He wore expensive clothes and boots polished to a high shine. His eyes were intelligent and assessing as Quinn dismounted. "Mr. Dalton, I am told you were exploring property that belongs to me. That shows either ignorance or audacity." "Which is it?" "Ignorance, sir. I apologize for the intrusion. I was simply looking for work opportunities." Vaughn studied him for a long moment. "You work for the railroad. Why would you need additional employment? Railroad work is not always steady. A man has to plan for the future." Tell me, Mr. Dalton, in your wanderings, did you happen to encounter anyone else? Perhaps a woman living rough out in the canyons?" Quinn kept his expression neutral with effort. "No, sir. Just coyotes and rattlesnakes." Vaughn's smile did not reach his eyes. "Good. Because if you had encountered such a person and failed to report it, that would make you an accessory to a crime. The woman I speak of is wanted for attempted murder. There is a substantial reward for information leading to her capture. I will keep that in mind if I see anyone matching that description. You do that." Vaughn gestured to one of his men. "Give Mr. Dalton something for his trouble and escort him back to the main road. And Mr. Dalton, I suggest you stick to railroad property from now on. The wilderness can be dangerous for those who do not know their way around." The threat was barely veiled. Quinn accepted a few coins from Vaughn's man and rode away with an escort that made sure he headed in the direction of Ash Fork. But he'd learned something valuable from the encounter. Vaughn was still actively searching for Josie, which meant he saw her as a genuine threat. That suggested she might have more leverage than she realized. As soon as he was certain he was not being followed, Quinn changed direction and headed for the cave. He needed to tell Josie about the encounter and warn her that Vaughn had men actively searching. The journey took several hours and the sun was setting as he approached the hidden entrance. "Josie," he called softly as he entered. "It is Quinn." She appeared from the inner chamber, rifle in hand, but lowered when she saw him. "You should not have come here directly." "What if someone followed you?" "I was careful. We need to talk. I met Vaughn." Josie's eyes widened. "You did what?" "Quinn, that was incredibly dangerous, I know, but I learned something important." He explained the encounter, watching as Josie's expression shifted from alarm to thoughtful concentration. "He is still looking for me actively," she mused. "That is actually somewhat encouraging. If he truly controlled the narrative, he would not need to worry about me anymore. He could simply have me declared dead or gone and claim the ranch through abandonment." "Which means he knows you have something on him," Quinn said. "Something that could hurt him if it came to light. What is it, Josie? What are you not telling me?" Josie bit her lip, then walked to her collection of belongings and pulled out a leather satchel that had been hidden under a blanket. She opened it carefully and withdrew a ledger book, its pages filled with neat columns of numbers and notes. "My father kept careful records of everything. Cattle bought and sold, water rights agreements, land transactions. In the months before he died, he noticed something strange. Cattle with his brand were being sold at markets in towns he had never visited, to buyers he had never met. Someone was rustling his stock systematically, but in small enough numbers that it took time to notice." She flipped through the pages, pointing to various entries. He started investigating quietly. He discovered that Vaughn was running a large-scale rustling operation, stealing from smaller ranchers and selling the cattle under false bills of sale. "My father documented everything he found. Names, dates, numbers. He was planning to take it to the territorial marshal when he died." "And you think Vaughn killed him?" "I know he did. My father's horse was found at the bottom of a ravine and everyone assumed it had been an accident. But my father was an excellent rider and that horse was sure-footed. I think Vaughn's men forced them over the edge." Quinn took the ledger, understanding now why Josie had been willing to risk everything rather than give up. "This is evidence. Real, documented evidence of Vaughn's crimes. Evidence that would be dismissed if I brought it forward, especially after Vaughn has spent months painting me as a dangerous madwoman. Who would believe me over him? He owns the sheriff, probably has half the territorial government in his pocket. Then we need to go over his head. The federal government has been cracking down on land fraud and rustling. If we could get this to a U.S. Marshal, someone outside Vaughn's influence." Josie's expression was skeptical. "And how do we do that without Vaughn finding out and stopping us?" or simply having us killed before we can reach anyone who matters? It was a valid concern. Quinn paced the cave, thinking through options. The railroad. My supervisor might be a bastard, but the company has connections to federal authorities. Railroad property rights are a federal matter. If I could frame this as affecting the railroad's interests, would he help? Maybe. Especially if we could demonstrate that Vaughn has been rustling cattle transported by rail or interfering with railroad business in some way. Quinn felt a plan forming. Give me a few more days. Let me see what I can put together. But Josie, you need to understand something. Once we start this, there is no turning back. Vaughn will come at us with everything he has. He has already taken everything from me except my life, Josie said quietly. I am ready to fight back. Quinn looked at her standing there in the firelight, dirty and exhausted but unbroken, and felt something shift in his chest. Over the past weeks, he told himself he was helping her because it was the right thing to do, because justice mattered. But the truth was more complicated than that. Somewhere along the way, Josie Sawyer had gotten under his skin. Her strength, her determination, the vulnerability she tried so hard to hide, all of it had worked its way into his heart. We are going to get your life back, he said. I promise you that. Josie met his gaze, and for a moment the protective walls she'd built around herself came down. Why are you doing this, Quinn? Really? He could have deflected, given her the easy answer. Instead, he told the truth. Because when I look at you, I see someone worth fighting for. Because in the short time I have known you, you have become important to me. Because I think I am falling in love with you, Josie Sawyer, and I need you to be safe and free so I can find out what that means. The silence that followed was heavy with emotion. Josie's eyes glistened, and she took a step toward him. You hardly know me. I know enough. I know you are brave and smart and stubborn as hell. I know you would rather live in a cave than compromise your principles. I know that every time I ride away from here, it gets harder to leave. Quinn closed the distance between them, reaching out to gently touch her cheek. Tell me I am alone in feeling this way, and I will never mention it again. But tell me the truth. Josie leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly. When she opened them again, they were filled with a mixture of hope and fear. You are not alone. I think about you constantly. When you leave, I count the hours until you might return. But Quinn, I am terrified. Everyone I have cared about has been taken from me. My mother died when I was 12. My father was murdered. I cannot bear the thought of losing you too, especially because of me. Then we make sure that does not happen. We are careful, we are smart, and we finish this together. Quinn leaned down and kissed her softly. A gentle brush of lips that held the promise of everything they could be to each other. Josie kissed him back, her arms coming up to circle his neck, and for a long moment, the world outside the cave ceased to exist. There was only the warmth of the fire, the solid reality of each other, and the fragile hope that somehow they could build a future from the wreckage of the past. When they finally pulled apart, Josie was smiling for the first time since Quinn had met her. We should probably talk about the plan instead of kissing. Probably, Quinn agreed, but he kissed her again anyway, quick and sweet. All right, now we talk about the plan. They spent hours going over the details, refining their approach. Quinn would take the ledger back to Ash Fork and make copies of the most damning evidence. He would approach his supervisor carefully, feeling out whether the man could be trusted. Meanwhile, Josie would stay hidden but prepare to move quickly if necessary. I hate asking you to stay here alone, Quinn said as he prepared to leave before dawn. I am used to it. But Quinn, if anything goes wrong, if Vaughn suspects what you are doing, you run. Do not try to be a hero. Just get yourself to safety. Same goes for you. At the first sign of trouble, you disappear deeper into the canyons. Promise me. I promise. Josie walked him to the cave entrance, where the sky was just beginning to lighten. "Be careful." Quinn kissed her one more time, trying to memorize the feel of her in his arms. "I will be back as soon as I can. A few days at most." The ride back to Ash Fork was long and gave Quinn plenty of time to think. He was taking a huge risk, not just with his own safety but with Josie's. If this went wrong, Vaughn would hunt them both down. But doing nothing meant condemning Josie to a life of hiding, and that was unacceptable. In town, Quinn went straight to the general store and purchased supplies for making copies of the ledger pages. He worked late into the night in his rented room, carefully reproducing the most important entries. His handwriting was not as neat as Josie's father's, but it was legible, and the numbers told their own story. The next morning, Quinn requested a meeting with Henderson. The supervisor was surprised but agreed, clearing his cluttered desk to give Quinn his attention. "What can I do for you, Dalton?" Quinn had rehearsed this conversation in his mind a dozen times. "I have come across some information about a criminal operation that might be affecting the railroad's interests." Henderson's eyebrows rose. "I am listening." Quinn laid out the basics, carefully omitting any mention of Josie. He framed it as information that had come to him through his work, evidence of a large-scale rustling operation that included cattle being shipped on railroad cars under false documentation. He showed Henderson the copied ledger pages, pointing out the patterns and numbers. To his credit, Henderson took the information seriously. He studied the pages, asking sharp questions that Quinn answered as honestly as he could without revealing his source. "This is substantial," Henderson finally said. "If even half of this is accurate, we are talking about major fraud. But Dalton, this implicates Silas Vaughn. Do you understand how powerful that man is?" "I do. That is why we need federal authorities involved. Someone who cannot be bought or intimidated." Henderson leaned back in his chair, thinking. "There is a U.S. Marshal coming through next week, regular inspection of railroad security. I could arrange for you to speak with him confidentially. But I need to know, are you certain about this? Because if you are wrong, or if this is some kind of personal vendetta, it will not just be your job on the line." "I am certain. The evidence is real." "All right then. I will set up the meeting, but Dalton, watch your back. If Vaughn gets wind of this before the marshal arrives, you are a dead man." Quinn left the meeting feeling both relieved and more anxious than ever. A week was a long time to keep this quiet. He immediately rode out to leave a message for Josie, updating her on the progress and warning her to be extra careful. The waiting was agony. Quinn went about his regular work, trying not to appear different or suspicious, but he noticed things that made him uneasy. A stranger in the saloon who seemed to be watching him. One of Vaughn's men riding through town, his eyes scanning the streets. The sense that walls were closing in. 5 days after his meeting with Henderson, Quinn was leaving the railroad office when someone fell into step beside him. He tensed, hand moving toward his pistol, but the man spoke quickly and quietly. "Easy, Mr. Dalton. Frank from the livery sent me. Said you might need some help with a certain problem." Quinn studied the man from the corner of his eye. He was in his 30s, with a weathered face and the look of someone who'd spent his life outdoors. "I do not know what you are talking about." "Fair enough. Name is Ben Riley. I used to work for Josie Sawyer's father before Vaughn's people ran me off. Frank says you are trying to help Miss Josie." "If that is true, I want in." Quinn's mind raced. This could be a trap, someone sent by Vaughn to infiltrate and learn what they were planning. But there was an earnestness in Ben's expression that seemed genuine. "Walk with me," Quinn said, leading them away from the main street. They talked for over an hour, Quinn carefully revealing just enough to gauge Ben's reactions. The man's story checked out. He had worked for the Sawyer ranch, had been there when Josie's father died, and had his own grievances against Vaughn. More importantly, he knew several other former Sawyer ranch hands who might be willing to stand as witnesses if things came to that. "Miss Josie is alive then?" Ben asked hopefully. "The rumors are she either died or went completely mad." "She is alive and sane, but I cannot tell you more than that right now. Can I trust you to keep this conversation to yourself? You have my word. That girl deserves better than what Vaughn did to her. Whatever you need, I am willing to help." Quinn made a decision. In 2 days, a U.S. Marshal is coming to town. I am going to present evidence against Vaughn. It would help to have witnesses who can corroborate the rustling and intimidation. Would you and the others be willing to testify? Ben did not hesitate. Yes, though I reckon Vaughn will not take kindly to that. That is why we need federal protection. Once the marshal hears the evidence, he can issue warrants and bring in enough men to arrest Vaughn and his crew before they can retaliate. They made plans to meet the night before the marshal's arrival. Ben would gather the other former ranch hands and they would all give their statements together. It was coming together, Quinn thought. They actually had a chance of pulling this off. That night, Quinn rode out to the cave, needing to see Josie and share the good news. He approached carefully, watching for any signs of being followed. Everything seemed quiet as he tied his horse and entered the cave. "Josie," he called softly. She emerged from the shadows, and the moment he saw her face, he knew something was wrong. She was pale, her eyes red-rimmed as though she'd been crying. "What happened?" Quinn asked, immediately alert. "Vaughn's men came by today. They did not find the cave, but they were close, searching the canyons. I heard them talking. Quinn, they know someone is helping me. They know you have been asking questions in town." Quinn cursed under his breath. They were running out of time. "We need to move up the timeline. The marshal arrives in 2 days. I need you to come to Ash Fork with me. Stay somewhere safe until we can arrange protection." "No. If they are watching you, leading them straight to me is the worst thing we could do." "Josie, you cannot stay here. It is not safe anymore." "Nowhere is safe right now." Her voice rose, edged with the stress of months in hiding finally breaking through. "Every option we have is dangerous. At least here I can hide. I can run if I need to." Quinn pulled her into his arms, feeling her trembling against him. "I know you are scared. I am scared too, but we are so close to ending this. Just hold on a little longer and I swear to you we will get through this." Josie clung to him, her face buried against his chest. "I keep thinking about what happens if this does not work. If Vaughn walks away free and we have shown our hand, he will never stop hunting us. It will work. We have evidence, we have witnesses, and we have federal law on our side. Vaughn has gotten away with this for so long because he has operated in the shadows, using fear and corruption. But that only works when no one shines a light on it. They stayed like that for a long time, drawing strength from each other." Eventually, Josie pulled back and looked up at him with determined eyes. "Tell me exactly what is going to happen. I need to know the plan." Quinn outlined everything in detail. The marshal's arrival, the presentation of evidence, the coordination with witnesses. He explained that Henderson would provide protection during the proceedings, keeping Quinn safe on railroad property if necessary. Once warrants were issued, the marshal would bring in deputies to make arrests. "Where do I fit into this?" Josie asked. "You stay hidden until the arrests are made. Once Vaughn is in custody, you can come forward safely. The charges against you are bogus, and with the evidence of Vaughn's corruption, they will be dropped. Then you can reclaim your ranch and your life." "And what about us?" The question was soft, almost shy. Quinn smiled and cupped her face in his hands. "Then we figure out what comes next, together." He stayed with her that night, neither of them willing to be apart when the future was so uncertain. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, building the foundation of something deeper than the crisis that had brought them together. Josie told him about her childhood, her dreams of expanding her father's ranch, her love of teaching. Quinn shared his hopes for the future, the life he wanted to build in this harsh but beautiful land. As dawn approached, Quinn knew he had to leave. The marshal would arrive the next day, and there was still much to prepare. "Whatever happens," Josie said as she walked him to the cave entrance, "I want you to know that meeting you was the best thing to come from this nightmare. You gave me hope when I had none left. We are going to have a future together," Quinn promised. "This time tomorrow, this will all be over and we can start building that future." He rode back to Ash Fork as the sun rose, his heart full of hope and determination. Everything was in place. They just had to execute the plan and trust that justice would prevail. But when Quinn arrived in town, he found it buzzing with unexpected activity. A group of riders had arrived overnight, rough-looking men who had taken rooms at the boarding house and were clearly not railroad workers or regular travelers. Quinn's gut told him these were Vaughn's reinforcements. He found Henderson at the office, looking grim. "We have a problem, Dalton. Vaughn somehow got word that a federal marshal is coming. He has brought in a small army, and word is he is looking for you specifically." Quinn's blood ran cold. "How did he find out?" "I do not know. But we need to get you somewhere safe until the marshal arrives. Vaughn's men have been asking around about you, and it is only a matter of time before they make a move." "When does the marshal arrive?" "This afternoon." "Can you lay low until then?" Quinn nodded, but his mind was racing. If Vaughn knew about the marshal, he might also know about the witnesses. Ben and the others could be in danger, and if Vaughn was desperate enough, he might intensify the search for Josie. "I need to warn some people," Quinn said. "Can you cover for me if anyone asks where I am?" Henderson sighed. "Do what you need to do, but be quick about it. And Dalton, carry your gun." Quinn left through the back of the office, moving quickly through the alleys to avoid the main street. He found Ben at a small cabin on the edge of town, along with 3 other men who'd worked for the Sawyer ranch. "Vaughn knows something is happening," Quinn said without preamble. "He has brought in gunmen. You all need to be careful." "We are ready for trouble," Ben said, and the other men nodded in agreement. "Question is, what do we do about it?" "We stick to the plan. The marshal arrives this afternoon. We give our statements, he issues warrants, and we let federal law handle it from there. But everyone needs to stay alert and stay together. There is safety in numbers." One of the other men, an older cowhand named Walt, spoke up. "What about Miss Josie? She's safe. She is hidden." "But I need to warn her that things are heating up." Quinn made a decision. "I am going to ride out to where she is, make sure she knows what is happening. Ben, can you and the others meet me at the railroad office at 2 o'clock? That is when the marshal is scheduled to arrive." "We will be there," Ben promised. Quinn slipped out of town, taking a roundabout route to avoid being followed. The morning was already hot, the sun beating down mercilessly as he pushed his horse hard. He needed to reach Josie, warn her, and get back to town in time to meet the marshal. He was about halfway to the cave when he saw the smoke. His heart stopped. Black smoke rose from the direction of the canyon where Josie was hiding, thick and ominous against the blue sky. Quinn kicked his horse into a gallop, fear giving him speed despite the treacherous terrain. As he approached the cave, he could see flames. Vaughn's men had found it. They'd set fire to the entrance, smoke billowing out from the opening. Quinn's world narrowed to a single desperate thought: Josie. He dismounted while his horse was still moving and ran toward the cave, calling her name. The heat from the fire was intense, smoke stinging his eyes and choking his lungs. He pulled his bandana over his face and plunged into the smoke. "Josie, where are you?" Through the haze, he heard coughing. Following the sound, Quinn found her collapsed near the back of the cave, overcome by smoke. He grabbed her and hauled her up, half carrying, half dragging her toward the rear passages she'd shown him. The main entrance was blocked by fire, but she'd mentioned other ways out, smaller openings deeper in the cave system. Josie was conscious enough to help guide him, coughing out directions between gasps for air. They stumbled through the darkness, Quinn using one hand to feel along the wall while supporting Josie with the other. His lungs burned, and black spots danced in his vision, but he kept moving. Finally, he saw light ahead, a narrow crack in the rock that opened onto the canyon floor. Quinn pushed Josie through first, then squeezed through himself, scraping his shoulders on the rough stone. They collapsed on the ground outside, gulping in clean air. "Are you hurt?" Quinn asked as soon as he could speak. Josie shook her head, still coughing. "Just the smoke." "Quinn, they found the cave. I heard them coming and hid in the back passages, but they set fire to everything. All my father's records, the ledger." Quinn's stomach dropped. "The original ledger burned, I do not know. Everything was in there, it might all be gone. This was a disaster." Without the physical evidence, their case against Vaughn became much weaker. It would be Quinn's word and the testimony of the ranch hands against Vaughn's resources and influence. "We need to move," Quinn said, helping Josie to her feet. "Whoever set that fire might still be nearby." They made it to Quinn's horse and rode double, heading away from the cave and the smoke. Quinn's mind raced through options. They could not go back to Ash Fork, not with Vaughn's men looking for them. But they needed to reach the marshal somehow, needed to make their case even without the ledger. "There is a lined shack about 5 miles from here," Josie said, her voice hoarse from smoke. "It is on abandoned land. We could hide there temporarily." The shack was barely standing, but it had 4 walls and a roof. Quinn got Josie inside and gave her water from his canteen. She was covered in soot, her clothes singed in places but alive. That was what mattered. "I am sorry," Josie said, tears cutting tracks through the dirt on her face. "I should have kept the ledger with me, should have been more careful. This is not your fault. Vaughn is the one who burned your home and your evidence." Quinn knelt beside her, taking her hands in his. "We are going to figure this out. I still have the copies I made. It is not as strong as the original, but it is something." "Will it be enough?" Quinn honestly did not know. "We have to try." "I need to get back to Ash Fork and meet with the marshal. Can you stay here, stay hidden for a few more hours?" "What choice do I have?" Josie's voice was bitter with exhaustion and defeat. "Hey." Quinn tilted her chin up so she was looking at him. "We are not giving up, you hear me? We have come too far and risked too much to quit now." Josie nodded, some of the fire returning to her eyes. "Go, do what you need to do, I will be here." Quinn kissed her hard, pouring all his determination and love into it. "I will come back for you, I promise." The ride back to Ash Fork was the longest of Quinn's life. He pushed his horse as hard as he dared, arriving in town just after 2 o'clock. The railroad office was buzzing with activity. A tall man in a dark suit stood talking with Henderson, and Quinn recognized the bearing of a lawman. "Marshal Croft," Henderson said as Quinn entered. "This is Quinn Dalton, the man I told you about." Marshal Croft was in his 50s with iron gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He shook Quinn's hand firmly. "Mr. Dalton, I understand you have information about criminal activity in this region." "Yes, sir, but we have a problem. The evidence was destroyed this morning, burned by the very men I am here to report." Croft's expression hardened. "Tell me everything." Quinn laid it all out. The whole story from finding Josie in the cave to Vaughn's systematic theft and intimidation. He showed the marshal his copied ledger pages and explained about the witnesses waiting to testify. As he spoke, Ben and the other ranch hands arrived, adding their own accounts to the picture Quinn was painting. Croft listened to it all, asking pointed questions and making notes. When they finished, he sat back and considered. "This is serious, but Mr. Dalton, you understand that without the original documentation, this becomes a question of witness testimony against Mr. Vaughn's word. That is a difficult case to make." "I understand, sir. But surely the pattern of testimony from multiple sources counts for something. These men have no reason to lie." "Perhaps not, but Vaughn will argue they are disgruntled former employees with grudges." Croft drummed his fingers on the desk. "Where is the woman, Josephine Sawyer?" "Her testimony would be crucial. She is in hiding nearby. I can bring her here, but she is afraid for her safety." "I can provide protection. In fact, given what you have told me, I think it would be best if we all remained on railroad property until I can bring in additional deputies." "Henderson, can you accommodate that?" "Absolutely," Henderson agreed. "Good. Mr. Dalton, retrieve Miss Sawyer and bring her here. I want to hear her story directly. The rest of you stay put. Do not leave this building for any reason." Quinn rode out again, exhausted but driven by the knowledge that they were finally taking action. When he reached the line shack, Josie was waiting anxiously. "The marshal wants to speak with you. He is providing protection at the railroad office." "Did he believe you?" "I think so." "But Josie, without the original ledger, this is harder than we hoped. Your testimony is going to be crucial." Josie squared her shoulders. "Then let us go give it." They rode back together as the sun began to set. Ash Fork was tense, Vaughn's men visible on the streets, clearly looking for something or someone. Quinn and Josie slipped in through the back way, reaching the railroad office without confrontation. Marshal Croft stood when Josie entered, his expression softening slightly at the sight of her soot-stained, exhausted condition. "Miss Sawyer, thank you for coming forward. I know this has not been easy for you." Over the next 2 hours, Josie told her story in detail. She described her father's investigation, the mounting evidence of Vaughn's crimes, the intimidation campaign, and finally the night she'd been forced to flee. She spoke about the shooting, admitting to it but explaining the context of self-defense. Her voice was steady despite the emotion behind her words. Croft listened carefully, occasionally asking questions. When she finished, he sat quietly for a moment, then nodded. "Miss Sawyer, I believe you. And I believe there is sufficient evidence here to open a formal investigation into Silas Vaughn's activities. However, I need to be honest with you. Making charges stick without physical evidence is going to be difficult. What I can do is provide you protection while I gather additional evidence and testimony. I will be bringing in federal deputies, and we will conduct a thorough investigation of Vaughn's operations." "What about the charges against me?" Josie asked. "Based on what you have told me, those charges should be dropped. I will speak with the sheriff and make it clear that you are under federal protection, and any attempt to arrest you will be seen as obstruction of justice." It was not the immediate vindication they'd hoped for, but it was progress. Real progress. "How long will the investigation take?" Quinn asked. "Weeks, possibly months. These things do not happen quickly, especially when we are dealing with someone as entrenched as Vaughn appears to be." Croft looked at Josie with sympathy. "I know that is not what you want to hear, Miss Sawyer, but I promise you, I will see this through to the end." That night, they all stayed at the railroad office, which Henderson had converted into a makeshift fortress. Guards were posted, and no one entered or left without scrutiny. Quinn and Josie were given a private corner, separated from the others by a curtain Henderson had rigged up. "I thought this would be over today," Josie said quietly, leaning against Quinn's shoulder. "I thought we would win and I could go home. We will get there. It is just going to take longer than we hoped. What do we do in the meantime?" Quinn wrapped his arm around her, holding her close. "We stay alive. We help the marshal build his case, and we hold onto each other." The next few weeks were a strange limbo. Marshal Croft brought in additional deputies, and they began a systematic investigation of Vaughn's operations. They interviewed dozens of people, examined financial records, and tracked down evidence of rustling and fraud. Vaughn's lawyers fought back hard, filing motions and injunctions, using every legal maneuver available to slow the process. Meanwhile, Quinn and Josie remained under protection, first at the railroad office and later at a small house Henderson helped them rent on the edge of town. The close quarters and shared danger deepened their bond. They spent long evenings talking about their pasts and dreaming about the future they wanted to build together. "When this is over," Quinn said one night as they sat on the small porch watching the stars, "what is the first thing you want to do?" Josie was quiet for a moment, then said, "I want to go to my father's grave. I have not been able to visit since I went into hiding. I want to tell him that I did not give up, that I fought for what he built." "We will do that," Quinn promised. "What else?" "I want to rebuild the barn, plant a garden, maybe get some chickens." She laughed softly. "Simple things, but they seem like impossible luxuries right now. They will not be impossible much longer. Croft is making progress. I can see it." And indeed, the walls were closing in on Vaughn. Several of his men turned on him when offered immunity deals, providing testimony about the rustling operation and other crimes. Financial records revealed a pattern of fraud and land theft going back years. The case was building, slowly but inexorably. 2 months after that first meeting with the marshal, Croft came to the house with news. "We are ready to make arrests. Tomorrow morning we are going to bring Vaughn in along with his top associates. I wanted you both to know ahead of time." "Will the charges stick?" Josie asked. "I believe so. We have built a solid case. Rustling, fraud, conspiracy, and we are pursuing murder charges for your father's death based on the testimony we have gathered. Vaughn is going to face justice, Miss Sawyer." That night, neither Quinn nor Josie could sleep. They lay together in the darkness, talking in whispers about what came next. "I am terrified it will all fall apart somehow," Josie admitted. "That Vaughn will find a way to escape justice like he always has. He will not. Not this time. Too many people are watching. Too much evidence has come to light." The arrests happened at dawn. Quinn and Josie watched from a distance as federal deputies surrounded Vaughn's ranch and took him into custody along with 8 of his men. There was some resistance, but it was quickly subdued. By midday, Vaughn was locked in the territorial jail, held on federal charges that would take him to trial in front of a judge who was not in his pocket. The sense of relief was overwhelming. Josie actually cried, something Quinn had rarely seen her do. "It is really over. He is actually going to face justice." "You did this," Quinn said, holding her. "You refused to give up and you made this happen." The weeks that followed were busy. Josie reclaimed her ranch, or what was left of it. With Vaughn's assets frozen pending trial, his illegitimate claim on her land was voided. She stood on the property her father had built, surveying the damage and making plans to rebuild. Quinn helped her every spare moment he had, and gradually others joined in. Ben and the other ranch hands came back to work. People from town who had been too afraid to oppose Vaughn openly now offered assistance. It turned out Josie had more support than she'd realized. People had simply been waiting for someone to stand up first. 3 months after Vaughn's arrest, Quinn made a decision. He resigned from the railroad and used his savings to buy lumber and supplies. When Josie asked what he was doing, he took her hands and looked into her eyes. "I am building a future here with you, if you will have me." Josie's breath caught. "Quinn, I love you, Josie Sawyer. I have loved you since I found you in that cave, stubborn and scared and absolutely refusing to give up. I want to spend my life with you, rebuilding this ranch, raising cattle, maybe starting a family. Will you marry me?" Josie threw her arms around his neck, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes. Yes, of course, yes. They were married a month later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Ash Fork. Marshall Croft gave Josie away, and Ben stood up as Quinn's best man. The whole town came to celebrate. These same people who'd turned their backs when Vaughn held power now eager to support Josie's fresh start. The trial came and went. Vaughn was convicted on multiple counts and sentenced to 20 years in the territorial prison. His ranch was sold, the proceeds going to compensate his victims. Justice, delayed but finally served. Quinn and Josie threw themselves into rebuilding the ranch. It was hard work, the kind that left them exhausted at the end of each day, but it was honest work, building something together. They rebuilt the barn, better than before. They repaired fences and rounded up cattle that had scattered. Slowly, the ranch came back to life. Their first year of marriage was filled with challenges and triumphs. They argued sometimes, about small things and occasionally about bigger issues, but they always worked through it. Quinn learned that Josie had a stubborn streak a mile wide when it came to ranching decisions, and Josie discovered that Quinn had a tendency to take on too much himself rather than ask for help. But they learned each other's rhythms, found ways to compromise and support each other. The ranch began to prosper. They hired additional hands and expanded the herd. Josie's business sense and Quinn's hard work proved to be an excellent combination. Within 2 years, they had paid off their debts and were actually turning a profit. In the spring of their second year, Josie told Quinn she was pregnant. He was overjoyed, already planning expansions to the house to accommodate their growing family. Josie bloomed with pregnancy, more beautiful than ever despite her complaints about her changing body. Their son was born in December, a healthy boy with Quinn's eyes and Josie's determination. They named him Samuel after Josie's father. Holding his son for the first time, Quinn felt a sense of completeness he'd never known before. This was what life was meant to be: family, purpose, love. Little Samuel was a colicky baby who kept them up at nights, but neither of them minded much. Quinn would walk him around the house, talking softly about the ranch and the future while Josie rested. During the day, Josie would carry the baby in a sling while she worked, refusing to let motherhood slow her down completely. "You are going to spoil him," Quinn said, watching Josie coo over their son. "Nonsense. It is impossible to spoil a baby. Ask me again when he is 3 and demanding a pony." "He can have a pony, he can have anything he wants," Josie laughed. "Oh, you are going to be one of those fathers, I can see it now." Life settled into a comfortable pattern. The ranch thrived, their family grew. 2 years after Samuel was born, they had a daughter, Grace, who had her mother's dark hair and fierce independence. Then 3 years later, another son they named Thomas. The house expanded to accommodate everyone, growing from the modest original structure to a sprawling ranch house filled with life and laughter. Meals were loud, chaotic affairs with children talking over each other and dogs begging under the table. Quinn would catch Josie's eye across the dinner table sometimes, and they would share a smile, remembering the lonely woman in the cave and the railroad worker who'd stumbled into her life. On quiet evenings, after the children were asleep, they would sit on the porch and watch the sunset paint the same red cliffs where they'd first met. You ever think about what would have happened if you had not found the cave that day? Josie asked one such evening, her head resting on Quinn's shoulder. All the time. I think about how close I came to riding past without seeing it, how my entire life would be different. You would have been fine. Probably married some nice woman from town, had a perfectly pleasant life. Quinn shook his head. No, it would not have been this. This is everything I never knew I wanted. You gave me that. We gave it to each other, Josie corrected. I was so lost before you came. I thought strength meant being alone, not needing anyone. You taught me that real strength is letting someone stand with you. As the years passed, the ranch became one of the most successful in the region. Quinn and Josie were respected members of the community, known for fair dealing and generous support of their neighbors. They employed a dozen hands, many of them men who'd fallen on hard times and needed a second chance. Josie never forgot where she'd come from or how close she'd come to losing everything. She started a small school on the ranch, teaching not just her own children, but also the children of their workers and nearby families. It fulfilled the teaching ambitions she'd set aside and gave her a sense of purpose beyond the ranch work. Quinn took on a leadership role in the Regional Cattlemen's Association, working to prevent the kind of corruption and abuse of power that Vaughn had represented. He pushed for stronger oversight and better protection for small ranchers. It was his way of ensuring that no one else would have to hide in a cave, afraid for their life. Their children grew up strong and capable. Samuel inherited his mother's business sense and his father's steady temperament. Grace was a firebrand, always challenging authority and pushing boundaries, but with a good heart underneath the stubbornness. Thomas was the quietest of the three, thoughtful and gentle, with a gift for working with animals. When Samuel turned 18, Quinn took him aside for a serious conversation about the future of the ranch. "This will all be yours someday, son. You, Grace, and Thomas. But I need to know if it is what you want, or if you have other dreams to pursue." Samuel looked at his father seriously. "This ranch is not just land and cattle, Dad. It is what you and Mom built from nothing. It is the proof that good people can win against corruption and greed. I want to be part of that. I want to continue what you started." Quinn felt pride swell in his chest, but also a touch of concern. It will not always be easy. There will be droughts and hard winters, market downturns, and difficult decisions. I know, but I will have what you and Mom had, each other in this family. That is enough to weather any storm. Grace chose a different path, leaving for university in California to study law. "Someone needs to fight for justice from the inside," she explained. "You and Mom taught me that standing up for what is right matters. I want to do that on a bigger stage." Thomas stayed close to home, working the ranch and developing a reputation as the best horse trainer in 3 counties. He was quiet but observant, often seeing things others missed. Quinn and Josie aged gracefully together, their love deepening with each passing year. They had their share of hardships, a drought year that nearly broke them, illnesses that scared them, the normal trials of life. But they faced everything together, their partnership stronger than any challenge. On their 20th anniversary, Quinn took Josie back to the cave where they'd first met. It was the first time either of them had returned since the fire. The entrance was still blackened, but nature had begun to reclaim it, plants growing around the opening. "I was so scared that day," Josie said, standing at the entrance. "So alone and desperate. And then you appeared and everything changed." "I was running for my life," Quinn reminded her. "Not exactly a romantic beginning. No, but it was honest, real. We saw each other at our worst and lowest, and we chose each other anyway. That is better than any fairy tale romance." They went inside, using a lantern to navigate the passages Josie had once known by heart. Much had been destroyed by the fire, but not everything. In one of the deeper chambers, protected from the flames, they found the remnants of Josie's cave dwelling. The blankets had rotted away, but there were a few items that had survived. A metal coffee pot, some tools, and incredibly, one of Josie's books, water-damaged but still readable. Josie picked up the book, a volume of poetry, and opened it carefully. On the inside cover, in her handwriting, was a note she'd written during her time in hiding. "I will not give up. I will not surrender. I will survive, and I will win." "You did all three," Quinn said, reading over her shoulder. "You survived, you won, and you never gave up." They took the book with them when they left, a reminder of how far they'd come. Back at the ranch, Josie placed it on a shelf in their bedroom where she could see it every day. As they entered their 50s, Quinn and Josie began to gradually hand over more responsibility to their children. Samuel took on more of the day-to-day ranch management. Grace, now a successful lawyer, helped them navigate legal issues and contracts. Thomas managed the livestock operations with quiet competence. But Quinn and Josie remained active, not ready to fully retire but content to let the next generation lead. They took more time for themselves, for quiet mornings on the porch and long rides across the land they'd fought so hard to keep. One evening, as they sat watching the sunset, Josie said, "Do you have any regrets? Things you wish we'd done differently?" Quinn considered the question seriously. "No. Every choice we made, even the mistakes, led us here. This life, this family, this love, I would not change any of it." "Neither would I," Josie agreed. "Though I could have done without the part where people tried to kill us," Quinn laughed. "Fair enough. That was not ideal." They sat in comfortable silence, watching as the sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and reds. Somewhere in the house, they could hear their children and grandchildren. Samuel had married and had 2 children of his own, and Thomas had recently gotten engaged. "We built something good here," Josie said softly. "Something that will last beyond us." "We did," Quinn agreed. "Together." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Quinn took Josie's hand in his, their fingers intertwining with the ease of decades of practice. They had been through so much together: fear and danger, loss and triumph, the daily challenges of building a life from broken pieces. But through it all, they had each other. The railroad worker who'd found a woman hiding in a cave, and the woman who'd refused to give up her fight for justice. 2 people who'd found each other in the worst of circumstances and built the best of lives. Years later, when their great-grandchildren asked about how Quinn and Josie met, the family would gather to tell the story. They spoke of courage and determination, of justice prevailing against corruption, of a love that started in darkness and grew into something beautiful and enduring. Quinn and Josie lived long, full lives, surrounded by the family and community they'd built. When Quinn passed away at the age of 78, Josie was holding his hand, just as he'd held hers through every challenge they'd faced. She followed him 2 years later, peacefully in her sleep, and was buried beside him on a hill overlooking the ranch they'd saved together. The ranch continued on, passed down through generations, each one honoring the legacy of the couple who'd refused to give up when the world seemed determined to break them. The story of Quinn and Josie became legend in the region, a reminder that love and courage could overcome even the darkest circumstances. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the light is just right, locals swear they can see 2 figures on horseback riding across the canyon lands, still together, still in love, still watching over the land they fought so hard to protect. The red cliffs of northern Arizona Territory stand eternal, bearing witness to a love story born in a cave, tested by fire, and proven stronger than anything that tried to tear it apart. Quinn Dalton and Josephine Sawyer had started with nothing but hope in each other. In the end, they proved that was more than enough. Their love transformed two broken people into a force that changed their corner of the world for the better, leaving a legacy that would inspire generations to come. That legacy lived on in their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren who worked the land, in the school Josie had founded that continued to educate, in the standards of justice and fairness Quinn had fought to establish. But most of all, it lived on in the story itself, told and retold, of how a chance encounter in a cave led to a lifetime of love, proving that even in the hardest of times, in the roughest of places, true love can not only survive but flourish, creating something beautiful and lasting that echoes through the ages.